our coordinator as well, Dr. Philip Epen. He is present. He had some incredible challenges to overcome. He actually just traveled here from India right before additional restrictions came into effect, but he's been doubly vaccinated and he quarantined for 2 weeks when he first arrived. So again, overcoming some incredible challenges just to pull this together this morning. He's going to notify me if there are questions that come up in the chat, because when I'm sharing my screen, I can't actually see the chat. So just Philip, if there's something urgent, just raise your hand and I'll stop what I'm saying. Also, one disclaimer, everybody knows while we're teaching online, especially from home, I've got 3 kids and I'm a single parent, so I never know what the kids are going to get up to when I'm actually presenting. And it sometimes is like a magnet. As soon as I get into my office and turn on the video cameras, they want to all get in here. So I've got Philip and Sarah McCrae on standby. If I get overcome with children, they may need to take over as moderators. So we're all set for this morning. I thought what we'd start off with, we've got, I think, quite a few participants who are here now. I thought we'd start off with some introductions of the participants, because you guys are our most important, asset to this program. And I did a welcome survey. We had a number of responses. If you haven't had a chance to complete that, it would still be useful for me, since this is a pilot program. We're hoping to develop it further from here, so you can still contribute your response. But out of the responses, we have quite a variety of participants. So we have lab instructors, we have general instructors, we have professors, graduate students, undergraduate students as well, and a research administrator. So don't feel like you're alone if you are, an undergrad or a professor. We really want to gear this to be quite versatile for all of you. It might happen that not everything is going to be informative and useful to you. You may already be an expert in some of the things that we do address over the next few panel sessions. However, we would like to encourage you to make the most out of this experience. So if there is something that we've touched upon in a video, but you'd like to dive into it a little bit further, that's what this panel session is for. So really take advantage of that. We have about 20 participants, so lots of time for you to engage with us. And if we run over time, I'm going to stay a little bit longer, as well as a few of the panelists if they've got the time. So feel free to ask questions, don't be shy. And without further ado, I think what I'll do next, I was also going to, in terms of the STEM fields that we originate from, so our participants come from a whole host of different fields. We have biologists, geographers, we have geologists, we have some professional students from business management who are particularly interested in the marketing component, which will come up with the publishing or presenting with panache session. So there will be something for everyone. We've got engineers involved. We've got someone who researches ecological identity as well. In terms of what participants are hoping to get from this, it is really what we've touched upon in most of the introductory emails. So things like, how do you engage audiences, maybe improving your teaching skills, especially if we continue to have to teach online. Things like public speaking. We've already had a few videos that address anxiety during public speaking, and you can ask Sarah some additional questions about state anxiety, so things that you might be particularly anxious about when you're communicating. We've also had some particular interest in how to get your research out. So specifically spread, maybe social media and how scientists do it. All right, so that was an introduction to your participants, and I have my son here who's building boats and things, but I think what I'll do is move on to the next slide here, and I'm going to mute my mic, and I'll let maybe Philip, if you want to moderate the introductions by our panelists. There you go.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Philip. I'm the coordinator for the Science Communication Skills Program. I'm so excited to be part of this program, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the panelists, all the students, and all the participants who are here today. And I'm sure this is going to be a great opportunity for everyone to learn from top to bottom. So thank you so much once again. And I think I would go ahead and ask Debbie to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Debbie Hendrickson. I work for the Office of Research and Graduate Studies. My title is Research and Teaching Communications Specialist, and that's in part because I'm shared between two departments, the Orgs Department and the Center for Teaching and Learning. My background is in public relations. I graduated from Mount St. Vincent with a Bachelor of PR. My experience, I position it as stakeholder engagement. The majority of my career I've spent communicating environmental type topics and projects. I was an environmental educator for probably 5 or 6 years. I moved on to work on a couple of fairly big projects, one being phase 2, phase 3 environmental site assessment and demolition at the Sydney tar ponds and coke oven sites. So I have a lot of experience in communicating with different publics about environmental topics of concern. More recently, I worked as a communications advisor for Emera on construction of the Maritime Link project.
Thank you, Debbie. I think we have Sarah here. She's a senior lab instructor, and I'm requesting Sarah to please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Philip. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah McRae. I'm so excited to be here with you today. I'm a senior lab instructor in communication at Cape Breton University. I instruct labs and courses in interpersonal communication, issues and media studies, and public speaking. So I look forward to chatting with you about how to manage your communication apprehension and how to use your visual, vocal, and verbal communication to your advantage when you're sharing your STEM stories. I really, truly believe that communication effectiveness, we know communication effectiveness can be learned. And I do believe it's one thing to have a really great idea. It's another thing entirely to be able to communicate that effectively. So that's what we're here to help you with today. I also, I'm the owner and a communication coach at SMR Communication, Speech Made Right, which is just the coaching and training services business that I started within the last year. I'm currently on maternity leave. I gave birth to my twin boys 8 months ago, and I have a toddler, Bo, who just turned 3. So very busy. And as I mentioned in our videos, if you had a chance to watch them, my sons have taught me maybe more about communication than all of the research I've studied over the last 10 to 12 years. So I really look forward to chatting with you today. Thanks, Philip.
Thank you, Sarah. And we have Dr. Stephanie. She's the Associate Dean. And let me welcome her to introduce herself.
Thanks, Philip. That's great. Yeah, so welcome everyone, and thanks for attending. It's lunchtime here, and I'm usually the short cook at lunchtime during homeschool. But so you might hear some beeping of the microwave and toaster as I introduce myself. I am a little bit more of here to talk about a particular experience that I was fortunate enough to be able to participate in back in 2017. I was invited to be a soapbox scientist in Canada's first inaugural soapbox science event that was held in Toronto. And I would say that of all of the years of teaching or being educated in a variety of different ways in terms of communicating chemistry, the soapbox science was probably the best lesson or ability or sort of training program that I was fortunate enough to experience, because it was the first time in my entire career that I was shown how to effectively take something that maybe isn't as exciting to everybody else, like biochar is to me, and to communicate it to the general public in a way that people would be excited about and understand. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about what soapbox science was and to answer any questions you might have, because although that's a specific training platform, there's a lot of techniques and tools that were taught during that platform that are definitely transferable into the classroom or into educating about lots of different STEM fields.
Thank you, Stephanie. And we have Dr. Ian here, and let me ask him to introduce himself.
I was just testing you to see if you were really listening. Good morning. Ian McNeil. I've been telling stories all my life. I worked in the media, mainly in radio for 25 years in many parts of Canada. I really feel radio is the greatest medium because the pictures are formed in our minds. And so the pictures are more vivid in radio than in any other medium. After working in radio, began to help other people tell their stories by forming a company where my main product was media training, helping people to get comfortable in what is usually the most unnatural environment for sharing your story. So I help people a lot in that way. And after running a business for 15 years, I thought, okay, now I want to coast to the finish line. And I'm working as a community engagement coordinator, telling the story of a business that provides services to senior citizens during a pandemic, helping them to remain alive in their own homes. And anyway, telling stories has gotten me through a lifetime. I think I can help you tell yours. All good stories are about people doing something for a reason. And the more compelling the reason, the better the story you will have to tell. Any questions you have, I'll be happy to help.
Thank you, Anne. Back to Katherine.
Hello.
Yeah.
It's pandemonium here this morning, but thank you all for your introductions. As I was mentioning earlier, hopefully our participants have had a chance to watch the videos. I thought to start off with, though, what I wanted to do, I think I'll actually just, since I've been talking, we've been talking a lot already, maybe we'll open it up to see if any of you have any introductory questions that you'd like to ask. And you can either turn your mic on, raise your hand and turn your mic on, or post it in the chat. And I have another slide to remind us of, I apologize for those pictures that I put up. I grabbed them from social media, so I apologize if that wasn't the picture of preference. But so here we have our list of videos that were in Module 1, and I put together a bit of a word art just to show us what the themes are of our communication program. If we don't have any questions to start, I can't see any raised hands. I think I'm going to ask, I'm going to throw it to Stephanie because I see Soapbox Science up there in the left-hand corner. And I thought it'd be interesting to ask Stephanie a little bit more about your experience with Soapbox Science. And I guess what sort of training, I know you were basically elected or appointed to be a soapbox scientist, so you were scouted for this. But is there a program that runs in parallel with what they do with professional scientists that might be offered to young career or undergraduate or graduate students for training?
Yeah, great question. So I guess in 2017 I was considered young career. So a lot changes in that many years. So it is direct. The Soapbox Science program is directed towards really any person who is considered to be an underrepresented person in their particular field of STEM and earlier in their career. So it doesn't have to be, you may not be in academics. In fact, when I did Soapbox Science in Toronto, there was a doctor, a biologist. There was 2 academics and there was an engineer as well. So there was 5 of us. We were all women. And the Soapbox program was started in London in 2011. And it was specifically directed at promoting women in STEM fields. Over the years, it sort of changed to include other underrepresented groups, in particular STEM fields. And it's the opportunity to be seen in a public platform for the science or the research or the STEM area that you're really passionate about. So it may be research, but it could also just be, for example, if you're a chemist and you're really passionate about, stopping chemophobia or trying to get people to get vaccinated, And then it provides this platform, which is literally, quite literally, a platform. And my specific soapbox science area was the corner of Yonge and Dundas. So I kind of felt like really out of place coming from Sydney and then going to downtown Toronto. And they give you a mic so that you can be heard in the busy hustle bustle of the street. And you have to draw people in. There's helpers that can draw people in to listen to you. So you stand on this soapbox and you try to get people excited about your research. So you can't just say, like, I couldn't just stand up there and be like, biochar is a carbonaceous material that is porous, and no one's going to come from like Dundas Street to hear about that. I had to say, like, are you using charcoal-based toothpaste? And of course, some people looked at me like, that woman's nuts. Like, why is she asking me this as I'm trying to take my child to soccer? But you know, that's the point. You have to draw people in, and then you say, okay, well, did you know that charcoal in your toothpaste or that charcoal that you're using in your face mask could be made from biomass? And then you get people excited and tell them about, try to convey something important that you're doing in a way that really makes the audience excited. So it happens every year. There's usually 2 or 3 soapbox science events in Canada across the country. You have to, it is a patented business. It's a not-for-profit, but you have to align your soapbox science event with the overall soapbox science group out of London, and they'll provide resources. So they're not-for-profit, but they have funding available. So for example, you asked about training, Catherine. What I thought was really cool is that the training started happening about 4 weeks before I went to Toronto to do soapbox science. They sort of gave examples of what it looked like in London and how other people communicated their research or their interests. And then we had 4 training sessions with a professional comedian. And that's what really helped me, because it was completely outside of my field, but they were able to teach us ways to communicate effectively to a crowd that really has maybe no interest or doesn't think they have any interest about what you're about to talk about. So I thought that was really cool. Sometimes it's comedians, sometimes it's communication experts. They have a whole variety of resources that they can pull from to train the soapbox scientists in effective communication. They also told me to stop talking so fast, but I haven't learned that properly yet.
And so have you taken up a second job as a comedian, a stand-up comedian?
No, I'm like the least funny person in my household.
Great. Thanks for that information about soapbox science. It made me think automatically. I thought about Lumiere that we have around town. And I thought, wouldn't it be neat if we actually ran a mini soapbox science during the Lumiere session, so people might get a taste of science as well. But just a thought. I always have lots of thoughts, but not enough time to follow them up. My next question, I guess, I think it's, we've had some excellent videos about the apprehension or anxiety in communication. And my personal experience is when I first started teaching, I was quite young and I had a faculty position at the University of Western Ontario. And I was almost the same age as some of the older students. And so I dressed in a business suit for my statistics course because I wanted to look professional and authoritative. And it was my first teaching experience, but almost every class beforehand, I'd get physically ill. So I still get butterflies in my stomach. I still get a bit jittery, and I no longer get physically ill, but I still get, red face, sweaty, or trying to talk while my kids are here. But the interesting thing is that yep, I'll fix that in a minute. Yep, I think it just needs a new battery. It's up in the utility room. So what a senior faculty told me is that the moment that you stop getting butterflies before presenting is the moment that you should give up teaching. So some degree of apprehension or stress actually, I think the adrenaline flowing through your body, as long as it's mitigated and you can manage it, I think it's really good for presenting because it helps you really connect. You're aware that your body is physiologically challenged or a little bit more stressed. And I think it gives you some hypervigilance with perhaps concentrating, being able to multitask with kids asking you to change batteries in a flashlight while you're trying to present to a couple dozen people. So I'll leave it at that, but I think I'd like to bring it to Ian, perhaps with you. Your video was on preparedness for presenting. And I'm wondering if you could sort of reiterate some of the key points or ways that you overcame apprehension, or perhaps you had a natural gift at storytelling, or was there a learning curve to help tame some of the apprehension that you personally experienced?
I basically learned that I was being scared is a natural reaction to what is an unnatural situation. Anybody doing a presentation may attempt to sound natural, but there's nothing natural about the situation where you're in, where you are transmitting to an audience with a view to changing their lives in some way. So I think it helped me to begin to accept that, okay, this is an unnatural situation, so I must do a better job of preparing for that. What people call butterflies would be cortisol and other hormones that help us to survive on this planet, because we have the fight, flight, or flee options for responding to these unnatural situations. For me, it helped to learn to eat something before I present. It slows down the metabolism and a lot of those butterflies. I went through having a process where I start to think about how I want to change that audience first. And then I try to sum up the essence of my presentation in one sentence that encapsulates people doing something for a reason. And then I just write that sentence down and refer to it as I prepare the presentation, and it reminds me to stay on track. And then I do things that help me present it more easily, like writing it in a big font, like having the margins be only 55 spaces wide. Each one of those 55 space lines is 3 seconds. So I can actually, without having to read my presentation, begin to calculate how long it will be. I like to make sure that the presentation is written in lowercase, so because the eye learns to recognize the shapes of words before recognizing the actual word itself. The whole idea was to make things routine. And as much as I've done thousands of presentations in many different kinds of media. And while the process of delivering them has become more routine, I still feel scared. I still feel the fear. I still feel the potential for screwing up and embarrassing myself in front of people who I may know or not know. And I've just learned to accept that that's a natural thing, and that if I have a process, I've learned to be ruled by a feeling other than fear. I try to be ruled by my feelings about the subject. So as I communicate with you today, I do so trying to remember the urgency that I want you to feel about having a process for creating your presentation, because I know it settled me down. I know it helped me build better connections with audiences, and actually allowed me to feel much more comfortable with something that isn't natural. It's just not natural to stand up in front of other people and talk to them. It's not something we're used to doing every day. So it's okay to feel scared, and it's how we react in the face of that fear that will, I think, have a lot to do with the quality of presentations we deliver. I'm open to your questions.
I have another question for you, Ian, just before we go on to another panelist. But the question I have, you mentioned that radio is one of the best forms of media because it forces people to conjure up their own images. And I'm wondering, first of all, does that make you hesitant to use visual aids when you give presentations? And the second follow-up question to that would be, do you think that's why podcasts are becoming so popular these days? Is that people have been lazy with their brains with smartphones, and maybe the podcast is helping different parts of the brain become more enlivened by having to listen to podcasts? or can they multitask better with podcasts? I guess there's lots of questions in there, but I'm just looking for your thoughts on that.
So when we refer to a podcast, I feel comfortable using the term radio interchangeably with podcast. Radio being transmitted from a station somewhere live or recorded in real time. A podcast, we get to choose when we're going to hear it. But the impact on the listener is to stimulate their imagination, whether it's a radio in your car or a podcast that you're listening to in some other way. When in radio or a podcast, people tell a story, we use our imagination to find our place in that story. Whereas if we're doing something on video or in front of people, we need to depend more on visual aids. So the podcast stimulates the imagination, which is the ultimate visual aid, because for each person, the images produced will be in their own frame of reference. They're highly personalized. I really believe for connecting, especially emotionally with people, that radio or podcasts is a much more personal media, and allow that imagination to really produce great images in your head. And that's very effective at reaching people on an emotional level. When I'm preparing for an audience and deciding on visual aids, I want to make sure the visual aid adds something. And in many cases, most of the presentations I consume these days are by people who do PowerPoint. And the number one thing they do is put way too much text on their slides. So there's very little to stimulate me visually there. And I also get the feeling that they're reading to me, which the reaction I have leads me to feel talked down to. So I'm inclined to reject what that speaker has to say. So I think if I sense that the speaker has not thought of me and my needs and actually hand selected a visual aid to help me get the thing they're talking about, I'm going to feel isolated by that speaker, not included by that speaker, and not really thought about or considered by that speaker. So the visual aid must add something. Otherwise, you just tell your story and get in and get out. The size of the audience will determine what kind of visual aid to use. There's lots of research to show that if I was to stand in front of the 24 people on this particular Teams call and demonstrate on a wall and write some things down, you will retain much more of what I have to say. But if there were hundreds or thousands of people in front of me and I was at a podium in front of an audience, working with a flip chart's not going to work. So I make sure it's appropriate to the audience. It has to add to my telling of the story and help me to connect with that person in the audience who really needs to hear what I have to say. I do go on.
That was very informative. Thank you. I'm going to ask a question to Sarah McCrae. This is related to the apprehension question that Ian covered in the first response. But as a professor, I often have students who really are reluctant to participate in oral presentations. And so oftentimes I try to work with them to come up with perhaps an alternative assignment if they just tell me that, you know, they've got anxiety issues, you know, so out of compassion. But I'm wondering, how do you approach something like that to perhaps not entice students to do something they really don't want to do, but to encourage them or perhaps provide some sort of platform that is a good introduction to helping them overcome that anxiety?
Yeah, that's a good question, Catherine. It's a little different for me. Most of the students in front of me are in a communication class where they're required to do some sort of communicating, but it doesn't mean that that apprehension level doesn't get that high, or that anxiousness isn't very real, and they aren't sure if they can do it. So sometimes we do one-on-one presentations. If a student feels they can't stand up in front of their students or peers, sometimes that pressure, take away that pressure, and they're able to do it a little bit better, that one-on-one communication. I remind students, and both you and Ian really touched on some points that I wanted to drive home as well, is I think it was Jerry Seinfeld that said, you know, people's number one fear, or number two fear in life, is death, and number one is public speaking. So the person at the funeral giving the eulogy would rather be in the coffin. And if you think about that, it's like, whoa, you know, why are we so fearful of that? And research shows it's because we feel our audience wants us to fail. Our brains play that trick on us all the time. So I think reassuring ourselves, and I tell my students this all the time, especially my students, you know, they get up in front of their classroom or their lab group and they're so nervous, and I remind them, every one of those people have to do it as well. They have to do it as you. And I might get a little comical, or think I'm comical, and say, and if we're being honest, half of them aren't going to be paying attention to you. So you're giving them too much credit, that you think they're going to be watching you so intently. And sometimes that gives them a little bit more comfort. But I just let them know that it's so normal, like Ian said, normalizing the feeling of that apprehension and anxiety, knowing that it's okay to feel nervous, taking that anxiousness if you can, and turning it into a positive feeling, positive energy, some adrenaline that we touched on. And then reminding yourself your audience wants you to succeed. You know how it feels. You don't want to be in an audience, a member of an audience, when a speaker is presenting and they have a slip up or a mess up. You feel that embarrassment with them, and you want to protect yourself from that. We want our presenters to succeed. So reminding yourself of that, I find, is really helpful. And that really has helped my students to be able to overcome that. We have to understand the difference in communication apprehension. So we mentioned trait communication apprehension. We all experience some level of that. Like you said, that's wise words from one of your mentors. We are never going to be able to erase our communication apprehension or anxiety. And just like they said, the minute you stop feeling that, get out, because it means you don't care anymore. When we're nervous, when we have that, some of those anxious feelings, those low level anxieties, it's because we care so much, and we want the audience to care as well, and we want to do well. So normalizing that feeling really helps, and turning it into that positive energy may help as well. But the state apprehension, we all feel some level of that. So that's the fear of public speaking, the nervousness we feel when we get up and present a topic in front of people, 2 or 3 or more other human beings. And then some of us experience trait communication apprehension. So state is the fear of public speaking. Trait is that feeling, it's inherent to us. We get nervous in any communication situation, whether it's meeting someone new, teaching a class, presenting in front of 5 people or 100 people, going on a date, meeting a new friend. All of those experiences, if we feel a higher level of apprehension, that falls under the trait apprehension. So really allowing your students, helping your students to become more self-aware, becoming more self-aware ourselves, really writing down, really reflecting on when we feel nervous, what does it look like? Katherine, you mentioned, you know, you get a red face. I know that my body temperature goes up. I know I tend to play with any jewelry I have on, so I wouldn't wear it. If I go into an interview, for an example, I wouldn't wear bracelets because I know I'll play with them the whole time. So if we really start to reflect and self-assess and become self-aware on how our CA manifests, understand to expect those manifestations, then we can start to manage them, and they won't add additional stress onto us in those anxious times. Does that answer your question, Katherine?
Yes, it does. And I noticed that's very helpful. And if you haven't seen Sarah's 2 videos, they're very informative. I thought the one where the point about the audience wants you to succeed is really reassuring. If you say that to yourself before you start a presentation or even a lecture, I think that would, you know, give you that self-confidence. It's like Stuart Smalley from Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
I'm beautiful, I'm smart enough, whatever. That was a funny one. I'm going to bring it to Debbie. I noticed you have your hand up. So Debbie, did you want to say something?
Just to add to, one moment there, my blank space office, just to add to Sarah's conversation about understanding who you are. And my example is, am I nervous giving a presentation? Everybody's nervous to a certain extent. However, I know myself. So I get red from here up, not so much my face, but I will get all blotchy. So I will never, ever wear an open necked top. I also watch what colors I wear, because if I wear certain gray colors, if I'm anxious, you will see sweat stains. So I'm very conscious of who I am. It's not so much that I'm a nervous presenter, but it just comes out in those forms. So I give the same advice. I have teenage daughters, and they're students at CBU. They hate presenting. Somewhat of a trait with them, that there's anxiety and a little bit of nervousness in different public situations. But I tell them the same things: be careful with what you wear, and know yourself, understanding that you're going to feel more self-conscious because you realize that you have red blotches, that it's showing your nervousness.
Sarah, did you have a point to add as well?
No, sorry, Catherine, I pressed that button by accident.
That's okay. I guess this is a follow-up to students who are reluctant to present. And I know at CBU, we do an awesome job of providing extra resources for things like math and science tutoring. We also have a writing center to help with written essays. But I'm wondering, and I should know this, I've been there for almost 20 years now, but do we have a resource for students who can't devote a full credit to taking a communications course, but maybe need some triage for preparing for a presentation? Like, do we have a tutor, like a communication anxiety or preparing for presentations, some available service for students who have incredible anxiety to overcome? Does anybody know? Sarah, do you know if we have like a tutoring?
As far as I'm aware, the first thing that comes to my mind would be academic success coaching may be helpful in that realm. We don't have specific communication presentation tutors. I don't think. I have been away from campus for the last year, so something may have changed. I will say, and I know not everyone has the space in their schedule or their academic journey to fit in a communication course, but when I am advising students and I hear them say, "Oh no, I can't take public speaking," because communication courses credits are required for most programs now as an elective in some, and I'll say, well, if you have that fear and you think you can't take it, that's the reason to take a public speaking course, right? Don't avoid it, because this will help you. And inevitably, no matter what program you're in, at some point in your education career, especially in your professional career, you will have to do some level of public speaking. So the course isn't to gauge how well you're speaking in public right now. It's to help teach you and help assist you in improving your own skills. And that might be a different journey than the student sitting next to you, but it's your own. It's to give you the theory and the skills that you can adapt to your own experience and your own level of comfortable, your comfort with that and your confidence, and it's to help you improve that. So I try to encourage students when I see them in the advising, when we first get them in front of us, if you have that fear, that might be more of a reason to take this course, or to seek out some communication training or help, because you need to be able to effectively communicate your ideas, whether that is to 2 people sitting across from you at a boardroom table or 50 people in a presentation room. So just something to think about there, to try not to avoid it.
Great. Yep, that's a good point. And I think most CBU faculty, instructors, and professors are willing to work with students to try to help them, do it one-on-one, give the presentation just in the office with the professor or faculty. But Jasmine also brought up a really good point. We, part of the grant, the ZenCert grant, the funding went towards developing the One Button Studio, which is now a bookable room at the CBU library, and Jasmine's been integral in helping get that set up. But basically you can walk in and you could do a professional presentation or a casual presentation for your class as an assignment. To hit a button, you put your jump drive in, and the system starts, and you can stand in front of a camera and do several takes to make sure you're happy with it. And maybe that would be one way, like an acceptable way. If you don't want to do it in front of the class, I suspect professors will be, very amenable, especially with these online situations with the pandemic. That recording is a really good practice for giving live presentations. I'm actually sometimes more nervous about my classes online than going into the lecture theater with 100 students before me. So there was a lot of anxiety with that online transition. But students, for some reason, if you can record it and do several takes with it, that may help them get over that apprehension as well. So yes, I don't think it's available for booking yet, but for all of our students and staff and faculty, we hope that it gets good use. You know, you can't do the editing of the video in the One Button Studio, but you could take it away, and there's some excellent free video editing software available. So you could actually, we're going to get a green screen in there as well. So if you want to create a video that then, instead of you being projected onto by the LCD projector, you could actually replace what's behind you, like a weather person if you want to be. It might be kind of fun. I'm thinking of some really great outreach videos that we can do for Island Wise, or, you know, to get young kids interested in science. So, but I just wanted to give that a plug since Jasmine brought it up in the chat. Sarah, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, you just touched on it, and Jasmine did as well. Whether it's virtual or in person, whatever our participants may be doing in their presentations, it's just a tip that came to mind. Is we often tell our students, always record yourself when you're practicing these speeches, whether it's for an assignment that you're going to be graded on, or a presentation you're going to give in front of a group of people, or if you are teaching online. If you record yourself and watch it back during your practicing process, you'll learn things about yourself that you don't know. So sometimes when my lab students are in front of me practicing a speech and I give them their assessment afterwards and say, try not to play with your hair, fidget with your clothes, they say, I don't do that. They don't know. We're not aware in the moment that we're doing those things. So I always encourage my students, record yourself if you can, if and when you can, watch it back, and try to reflect and pick out some of the things that you may see yourself doing in that visual communication. So that's just a tip for participants.
That's a really good tip. When I first had to record videos, I cringed every time I'd play it back. But you know what? I just learned to live with it. And I think it improved my ability to communicate, because I was forced, it's like staring in the mirror. You're forced to look at your flaws, and you can never perfect yourself. But I do think that being forced to watch those recordings just to make sure that they were working properly, I managed to record one with the screen completely inverted, and I don't know how it happened, but you always check before you upload it for 100 students to watch it. So I think, you know, no matter how cringeworthy listening to your voice might be, or seeing yourself on video, it's you. You just have to embrace it and, you know, roll with the punches. And we are our worst critics. So I think I was pleasantly surprised by the evaluations I got from students who loved some of the videos I put up on, you know, sharks, or telling stories of, you know, scuba diving and things like that. So I'm going to now focus on Debbie is a panelist as well, and she prepared a presentation on the 3-minute thesis, which is a platform. You can watch her video, but although I've never participated in it, I saw some of our honors students presenting their 3-minute thesis projects several years ago, and they went through training for it. And I thought, what an excellent thing that you could incorporate into your own classes if you wanted to. And for me, forcing myself to create a 3-minute video, I went over a little bit, but creating a 3-minute video on a topic really does help you focus on what is the most important thing that you want to convey. So Debbie, I guess I have a couple questions for you about the 3-minute thesis. Are we still doing that at CBU? Like, do we offer training in it? And I guess if you want to say a few things about 3-minute thesis in general, that would be really useful.
Well, I hope everybody had a chance to look up some of the samples of the 3-minute theses. So CBU doesn't officially participate in the 3-minute theses competition. We have our version. It's known as the Snapshot Theses. Last year, it was underway as far as the training and preparation, and Sarah McCrae is one of the faculty who volunteers her time to work with the students. We have a smaller number of students who would be participating in research at that level, so a limited number. So it doesn't give us much room for a competition per se. However, they've typically delivered those presentations during Research Month. We were stopped short last year. due to the campus closure. And this year, of course, we took a pause on Research Month. So we will certainly look at providing that opportunity for students to practice that 3-minute condensing of their research work to present it to a general audience. The other thing that the research office does is supports the student summer lecture series, and that continued last year. We have a couple of people who are very active, Jeffrey Dadswell and Andrew Reynolds. They do all the heavy lifting on that program, but incredibly successful. Some excellent presentations come out of that, and there's always great attendance. So certainly we hope to continue offering those 2 student-focused presentation programs.
That's great. And I know the 3-minute theses from the past are archived somewhere. The website keeps changing, but I know I have seen some of the ones that were done in the past. And I'm thinking maybe following this whole NSERC communication session, I think it'd be great to chat about trying to develop a communication platform for the research office and maybe using that as a repository for what we've created here, but also for the snapshot thesis going forward. So I think, and general resources for presenters. So maybe tailoring some videos towards undergraduates and things like that. So just a thought. And again, I'm creating lots of ideas on the fly here, but with lots of people listening, then maybe we can make some of them come to fruition. Any other questions about 3-minute theses or the snapshot thesis? Any, okay, I just had to dress someone in their Paw Patrol Halloween costumes. A couple questions. Let's see here. Before I continue, are there any questions from participants? Anything that you'd like to ask? And again, if you don't feel, if you don't want to do that, I'm just trying to see behind my menu box here. Guess there's no questions. I'm trying to think a couple of things, just looking through my, this has been touched upon before, but, and I kind of waffle about it. So I guess throwing it out to all panelists, what are your strategies? Do you normally write out your presentations first, or do you feel that that might seem too practiced or too cribbed, or, like it's not as dynamic as you'd like it to be? So my strategy, I used to write out my lectures and everything, but as my life got real and really busy, I don't really have the time. And in some ways, I worried that the quality of my presenting wouldn't be as great with less preparation. But I suspect that it's largely due to having 25 plus years of experience of teaching, that I can rely on that experience so much that I don't have to sort of write things out. I would if I had to do a 3-minute video, for example. So I did jot specific things down. So I guess throwing it out to whoever would like to answer that, do you still write things out for preparedness? And I know, Ian, you've covered it a little bit. Related to that, I do these tangents, but you talked about a 55-point margin, and I'm wondering if that writing method actually came from something like teleprompts or the way that the communications are prepared for you as a radio announcer. Was that something that they do so that they can time, like I've been interviewed by CBC before, and they have it right down to the second almost in terms of how much people can say in a given time. So I'm wondering if that's a residual or a carryover for your preparedness, something that you learned from the radio industry.
It is. And in radio, you develop a very finely tuned appreciation of time. The other thing in radio is that while you never really see the people to whom you're talking, you are aware of it. And we realize that we're trying to connect with one other person who we can't necessarily see. And for me, to show that one person respect, I wanted to make sure I made the best use of the time that I was claiming for the two of us to share. So if it was a 3-minute presentation, yeah, I write it out. If it's 10 minutes, yes, I write it out. If I practice it, if it's a theme that I explore a lot, if like you, I had 25 years experience of delivering it, then I feel I could lift it off the page and perhaps use bullet points to guide me through the presentation. But the job I'm there to do is to help people think, feel, or do something. That's what I'm there to do based on my presentation. I'm not there to be interesting, or being interesting may help, but that is not the end goal. So I write it out because for me, that builds confidence. If I'm being the master of ceremonies for the Celtic Colors grand opening concert, if you see me walk out on the stage in my kilt, you will see that I have pieces of paper in my hand, but that I don't actually refer to them. I have prepared enough in advance to know that I have enough, a minute and 10 seconds worth of material in this tightly timed format to get me to that first performer. And out of respect for the audience, I have written it down, and I know it will take a minute and 10 seconds. I may not, because I've rehearsed it, I can deliver it without looking at the piece of the paper. The paper gives me confidence. The act of writing it down, I think, helps reinforce the presentation in my memory. I really believe people should spend more time writing things down, because a lot of people think, oh, I can just get up in front of people and be interesting by myself. And most of the time, people who are just really showing they didn't prepare to spend time with me. You've asked me to give you 10, 15, 20 minutes, 40 minutes of your time, but you're not acting like it. And so I think it's a sign of respect to the audience, of whom I try to be keenly aware at all times, to actually write it out and to know where I'm going and to have a sense of the journey on which I'm going to guide you. I don't want to be making it up, winging it, anything like that.
That's a good point too. And as a faculty member, since I've been teaching for about 20 years or so, you know when students have not prepared. So they're the ones who typically read they've got too much text on the slides. They read it like, Ian was mentioning earlier, that it kind of is a sign of disrespect or just a lack of preparation. So we see everything. You gain that experience in seeing whether people are really connected with the material they're presented, or did they do it last minute the night before just to get that assignment done. Sorry about the noise here. So I think Sarah has her hand raised. So maybe Sarah, if you'd like to address that. You're muted. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Just chatting to myself. Sorry. No, just to add to what Ian was saying and to your question, and Jason mentioned it in the chat. So of course your medium matters, your audience matters, what type of presentation you're doing, if it's a 5-minute presentation, a lecture, an online class, et cetera, et cetera. But we often tell our students, and I keep this in mind all the time, preparing for presentations myself, I think writing it down helps me remember it and absorb the information. It also helps in my editing process. So sometimes I can be long-winded. When I'm writing it down and I go through in my head, when I go back to it, I realize things I can take out or that are kind of fluffy or things that I want to add in. So it helps me visualize it a little bit better, and then in turn helps me remember it for when I'm ready to deliver it. It doesn't mean I'm going to read it from what I wrote, but the writing is part of my process. And it helps me stay organized. So we tell students, thinking of a speech is similar to writing a paper. You have your intro, your body, your conclusion. Your audience should be able to be awake for the end, the start and the end, fall asleep a little bit in the middle, and still have a pretty good idea of what you talked about. So that helps you stay concise. So your attention getter, your introduction, your thesis statement, your enumerated preview, those 3 things you want to touch on. If you approach any topic and there's 3 important points you want to drive home, well, what are the 3 sub-points for each one of those points that you want to touch on? And this just kind of helps you categorize and organize in your mind during your preparation. And then your conclusion would just be that mirror image of your introduction. So your body is those 3 main points, elaborated on by those 3 sub-points for each one. Your conclusion is that mirror image of your introduction. You review what you just talked about, you restate your thesis statement, your purpose, you give them some sort of conclusion that left hook that you want to leave them with, similar to your attention getter. We call it a clincher. And that kind of wraps up your presentation in that nice little bow and makes it memorable for them. And then you conclude with a simple thank you. One of my tips to students and to all of you, when you're presenting, when you're teaching a class, when you're making a point, you can just end. Sometimes we're scared of silence. You can pause, embrace the silence. It might feel like 5 minutes to you. It's 3 seconds probably. And we appreciate that silence. So if you get comfortable in that silent, those few silent seconds, and at the end with a thank you, thanks for your time, thank you for having me. You do not need to say that's it or I'm done. When you say thank you, your audience knows you're done. They'll clap, they'll thank you for being there. So try to avoid that. That's our anxiety saying like, okay, that's it, I'm done now, stop looking at me. So you don't need to say that. You can just finish with your thank you. So thank you.
Sorry about that. Stephanie, did you have your hand up?
I did, but really Sarah just said it more clearly than I ever could. I do think it does depend on the situation. So if I'm teaching, I rarely use notes anymore. I did when I first started. But if I'm going to go into a situation where I want to talk about something that I'm a little bit less comfortable with, or that I don't think my audience has maybe a good understanding of, I sometimes have a couple of notes just to keep myself on point and also to stop myself from taking tangents, like going off on something that is not really important to what I'm trying to stay focused on. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I'm having a bit of a crisis with someone not wanting to do homeschooling. So I see Debbie has her hand up. So Debbie, did you want to add something?
My experience of late has been as a communications advisor. So my role was often to prepare speeches for other people. So in that capacity, I scripted the speech word for word. And I follow a lot of the principles that Ian talked about, using lots of white space on the page, making sure that there is spacing between the lines, because regardless of whether it's the CEO or it's an elected official, they are still experiencing all the same anxieties that we are in giving a presentation. So having that logical, well-organized speech in front of them certainly helps with the delivery of the presentation. So I'm in favor of scripting it, and then the speaker would then take it and put in a couple of notes in the side margins for their own reference and their own prompts, but certainly in favor of practicing the speech in its entirety as well.
Great. Yeah, I'm gonna have to sign off just because I've got 3 kids in here probably looking for lunch and a dog that's gonna bark. But I'm gonna leave it up to Philip and Sarah to say thank you or to field any additional questions that are left. So I apologize for having to leave, but they've been pretty good for the past hour. So I've got to go get William set up with math class. Okay.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes. Any more questions? Hello.
Hi, Philip, we can hear you.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Hi, it's Denise. And I was wondering, after a few of you were speaking, about people worrying about their voice being squeaky. And even when you're hearing the news reports on the radio or television, some seniors will say, I can't hear that person. And I don't know if they're saying they're in their nose or their throat, and so what do people do to prepare a better voice so that others can listen and hear their message better? Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's hard because it's difficult to change your tone, but one of the problems I suffer with is I speak too quickly, especially when I'm excited and happy about that. So when I'm teaching, I always try to give the students as much capacity as possible to interrupt me and slow me down in different ways. Like online, I'll just tell them to use an emoji show me an emoji on Teams, and that'll tell me that I'm talking too quickly. And then if you don't want to interrupt me verbally, then you don't have to. It'll just give me an indication that I'm speaking too quickly. I have the most trouble with it when I'm presenting my research, because I just get really excited, and then I do try to practice to slow down, but it's difficult. I don't really know the answer to that question.
I have some thoughts on it, if I may.
Yep.
Great.
I started out working in broadcasting in an era where males with deep voices had the inside track for on-air positions. But as my career evolved, more diverse voices were considered in the roles of broadcasters, and it was for the better. So when the person asking the question said, hey, my voice may feel a little thin, that sort of thing, how do I change my voice? I don't believe that's the place to begin. I think the ultimate thing in any form of public speaking is conveying your feeling about the thing you're talking about. So I really believe if you are consumed by your feelings about the subject that you're discussing, then your voice will be forgiven. The quality of your voice will be forgiven by the audience. It's why we can relate or be inspired by a Stephen Hawking talking through a voice box, because the ideas and the way they are acquired are just so fantastic. So I don't think we want to necessarily focus on the thinness of our voices, when really, if we're focused on the audience, they really need to hear this thing I'm talking about. And if you are consumed by the urgency to get that across, the quality of your voice, I believe, will be forgiven. And so when the previous speaker was talking about, hey, sometimes I talk too fast because I'm really excited about that thing. Give me the excitement about that thing, and then I will understand why you're talking to me about it. But if you put it in a really deep, professional, highly produced voice, I don't think I'm going to get the same feeling. I don't think I'm going to get the same retention of the idea you're sharing. I'll stop there.
If I can jump in, I apologize. My Teams app stopped working there for a moment, so someone may have already touched on this and I missed it. But what came to my mind, Denise, and Ian's right, that feeling is so authentic to you and your work that should come through. But our vocalics, the vocal quality of our voices, they can be practiced as well. So the same way you're organizing and preparing for your speech, if you know you tend to have a voice that gets a little squeaky or whatever it is that you want to manage, start practicing your presentation using the use of vocalics. So knowing where you want to pause, knowing where you want to increase your volume or your rate. But it's a fine line, like Ian said, you don't want to lose that authenticity or that authentic excitement about your topic, but you do want to make sure you know your audience. So if you know your audience is going to be maybe a group of senior citizens who have trouble hearing, then maybe you do increase your volume during that presentation. So knowing your audiences, but also practicing the vocalics, the rate, the tone, the way you want to pronounce certain words or put emphasis or feeling behind certain words and phrases throughout your presentation, that will send home that message. Hopefully it will allow the audience to listen to you a little bit more effectively. And it will also add to the feeling that you feel for that topic at hand and show that feeling. I mentioned in the video, oftentimes we know the power of nonverbal communication. We know that if my husband asks me how I'm doing and I say, I'm fine, that he should know I am not fine. So we know sometimes that how we say a word means more than the word itself. So thinking about that as you prep and practice may help you.
Thank you. And with the pandemic, you certainly can tell the difference between who's practiced and who's had help when you're seeing Lisa Baird speaking slow like this. And when I was giving my online presentation, sometimes I was thinking that I was speaking slowly because their screens would break up if you went too fast or if you moved too much.
Yeah, there's so many variables now with the virtual world. So again, being aware of some of the issues you may run into and adapting to that. I mean, I think that's been the theme of the last year or so is adaptability. So that will continue, I'm sure. Thank you. Good question, Denise. Philip, is there another question anyone has?
No.
Maybe we'll give it a chance for our participants. If there's any other questions, if you're not comfortable speaking or putting your video on, feel free to use the chat to ask it. Maybe we'll give it another second or two, Philip, if that's okay, for participants to ask any specific questions. I know I'm available for a few minutes after we end if you have a personal question specific to you or your experience that you want to ask. So I'll stick around for that. I think I see a hand up, but I don't know whose hand it may be. Philip, can you see the list of participants?
Yeah, it's Anand. Hello, Anand.
Yeah, hello guys. So my question is, you guys have been talking a lot about how we prepare for these sessions or the content which we know about we're going to talk about. So how about like something instant, something spontaneous? We do not know what's the another person is going to ask. So how do we be ready for that?
Do you mean an impromptu presentation or speech, or what the audience may ask of you afterwards?
Yeah, like we are in a meeting or just like you guys are speaking right now. So do you guys prepare for these kind of sessions also, or what are the pinpoints you focus on?
Debbie, did you want to respond?
It depends on your topic. My experience is that if you have a topic that is unknown, uncomfortable, new, or affects people in their own personal life, you better do an exhaustive list of potential questions. So you have to anticipate. Okay, so practicing that before someone else might help you elicit some of those questions that would come from a general public if you were communicating, especially a STEM topic. So again, you should do an exhaustive Q&A type of process so that you're ready for just about anything. Is that to say there's going to be a question that's going to be thrown at you that you're not prepared for? Of course, that can happen. And it's always fine to say, look, I don't have the information right now, but if you give me your contact information, I will provide it to you later. So yeah, so I would suggest you make a running list of the potential questions and draft answers for those questions.
I agree with Debbie. So anticipating what questions may be asked, having your answers ready for that, knowing your information, knowing your material well, having confidence that you can, if there's a question thrown at you that you may not be prepared for, that you know enough about your material that you can answer that. But I also remind everyone, if you do not know the answer, don't pretend you know it. It is okay to say, that's a great question. Let me get back to you on that. And then follow up with that. So don't just say that. You want to follow up, but I'll give you a little insight into how I prepared. So we had a meeting last week. We knew that just to get ourselves organized and what this live panel may look like. We also, before I was jumping on today, I knew some points that I wanted to make sure I got across. I also anticipated some questions that you may have asked from the videos, and I just made myself little notes on a piece of paper in front of me. So I just have little words that I can look at and think, oh yes, did we touch on that? Or that might be helpful. So just again, giving yourself some of those points to remember, some of those bite-sized information that may be helpful. That answer your question?
Oh, yeah, that was it.
The whole COVID vaccine process is probably an excellent example. Any question that you have in your mind now about getting a vaccine, what about this, what about that? My vaccine appointment is tomorrow. So I had the question in my mind, okay, what if I'm positive and I don't know it? And I go for my vaccine. So I would expect that public health is doing that exhaustive Q&A session in amongst their staff people, including the communications staff, to anticipate any possible question that the public is going to have, to be able to respond to that. Because of course, in that situation, you don't want to have that, yeah, that's a really great question, but I don't have the answer. That's not what the public wants to hear. Part of your engagement with the public in that case is to dispel any fears, concerns, to help them overcome that. So you have to be prepared to answer that question. So indeed, I did find the answer to that particular question and many others related to the vaccine that came to mind as I was preparing for that for tomorrow.
Great example, Debbie. Thank you. Any other questions? I know we're a little over our allotted time, so most people had to run, but if anyone else has any questions, feel free to ask them. Philip, I'll let you do the wrap up if you would like.
Yeah, if there are any questions, we can still wait for a few more minutes. And if otherwise, thank you so much for your time and your participation. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you.